In the United States Army, there are two ways to learn how to jump out of an airplane. You can go to the 3-week training school, learn about your equipment, practice exits, landings, and emergency procedures, then make your jumps in a highly structured, safe environment. Or Plan B, you can strap yourself into a parachute, hook up the static line, and just jump. Either way, the result will be the same. You will land on the ground. MACV SOG was the Plan B of Special Operations. 3 unmarked CH-34 King B helicopters departed Cam Duck Special Forces Camp and headed north of west. The Vietnamese pilots were forced to hug the rugged mountain terrain due to heavy cloud cover. Shortly before dusk, 2 senior Special Forces sergeants and 7 Hmong mercenaries were inserted into Laos without opposition. MACV SOG's American-led cross-border operations had begun. As the weather deteriorated, the air crews returned to base. En route, 1 King B and the forward air control plane disappeared into the clouds. Special Forces legend and veteran of 3 armies, Captain Larry Thorne, was lost. He would be the first of hundreds. 5 days later, aided by more than 30 airstrikes, the team was extracted from Laos. During their debriefing, they stated that the NVA were not aware of their presence and that security on the ground was lax. Observation of the enemy ended prematurely on the 3rd day with a chance encounter during which their point man was killed. Now compromised, with aircraft grounded due to poor weather, they were forced to evade the enemy for 2 days before being extracted by helicopter. They reported seeing scores of NVA troops, some obviously stationed in the areas, others appeared to be in transit. Supplies were transported by bicycles. Crates of munitions were stacked high in the jungle. Assertions that they heard heavy truck engines were received skeptically by their debriefers. SOG's first mission was considered a tremendous success, providing valuable insights to the enemy's activities in Laos. Although the loss of Larry Thorne and the aircraft crew were mourned, the reason for the loss was ignored. Commanders eager to run the mission put the men at risk by inserting the team in marginal weather. It was a problem that would plague SOG throughout its existence. Operations officers, frustrated by cloud cover, commonly demanded their forward air controllers find a hole in the clouds big enough to put a team in. The tactic would cause the deaths of more than a few SOG operators. As cross-border operations began in earnest, 3 facts about the North Vietnamese supply system were known. The majority of supplies entered Laos through the Gia Pass, 80 miles north of the DMZ. CIA assets were in place monitoring truck traffic. Radio intercepts indicated that the NVA headquarters in Laos was located near the crossroads town of Chepon. It was heavily defended by anti-aircraft weapons. The Asha Valley was the entryway for troops and supplies into South Vietnam. In the early 60s, NVA pressure had forced the Americans to abandon their special forces camps in the valley. Now it was SOG's job to fill in the details. SOG set out establishing bases and recruiting mercenary troops. The call went out to the 5th Special Forces Group for volunteers. Senior NCOs with years of experience enthusiastically signed up. Getting the top-secret unit operational proved difficult. Due to complicated political reasons, William Sullivan, America's Laotian ambassador, who was opposed to the introduction of American ground troops into Laos from the start, had final approval on all of SOG's missions. Forbidden to carry identification or American weapons, the Special Forces volunteers practiced with the supplied Swedish K-submachine guns. Firing a 9mm pistol round, it was no match for the enemy's AK-47. Then they turned to equipping and training their indigenous troops. Most had years of service in Special Forces, and many had experience running patrols out of A camps on previous tours in Vietnam, so they were familiar with the task. Missions were scheduled, delayed, and rescheduled or canceled altogether, most because of the weather, but the ambassador's constant micromanagement was also a major factor. Finally, SOG was generally authorized to enter Laos with up to 12 men for a depth of 20 miles from the Ashaw Valley to the DMZ. They would explore this 1,200 square mile area, one 14 square mile target box at a time. The initial targets were selected geometrically, trying to divide the area into sectors. Teams were inserted into primeval mountain jungle with no signs that humans had ever been there. They called them dry holes. SOG's headquarters was under pressure to find the enemy. It is not difficult to imagine meetings of staff officers arguing over targets and finally asking an E7 for advice. The answer was water. The enemy could not exist without water. Target priorities were changed. By the time the first American was killed by enemy contact southwest of Khe Sanh in July 1966, most of the teams had completed a mission. 3 months later, SOG's first recon team was destroyed when it was attacked on the landing zone south of Chepong. Moving into 1967, SOG was running missions from 3 FOBs in its northern sector. Recon mission tempo picked up. Now operating closer to water, teams were finding well-traveled high-speed trails and enemy bivouac sites. Encounters with the enemy were quick and violent. Mercifully, casualties were minimal. It was frustrating, dangerous work. Pre-mission intelligence was practically non-existent. Each target seemed to be its own little war. Team leaders, now with a significant number of missions completed, began sharing their experiences, trying to determine the tactics the NBA were using to counter their operations. It quickly became evident that there was little consistency. This was confirmed by POW interrogations. SOG incursions into Laos were being handled by local NVA commanders who responded with tactics from aggressively pursuing the teams to simply stopping all traffic in their area and waiting for them to leave. Information was not shared between FOBs. Senior NCOs began wondering if anyone, anywhere, was bothering to connect the dots. In June, acting on radio intercept information, SOG inserted a 100-man hatchet force 40 miles south of Chepong, well outside their normal area of operations. The target, designated Oscar 8, was fortified with anti-aircraft weapons. Nearly half of the fighting force and supporting aircraft were lost. But as was often the case in SOG's operations, its biggest losses were also its greatest success. The North Vietnamese Army's largest supply depot and maintenance area in Laos, Binh Tran 34, had been discovered. In the second half of 1967, as targeting became more precise, the enemy became more aggressive. By the end of the year, 16 more Americans were killed or went missing. The loss of these men, many considered to be the backbone of Special Forces, sent shockwaves through the 5th Group and Fort Bragg. It seemed like every week, someone everyone knew or had heard of was getting killed. Meanwhile, in a nondescript building on Pasteur Street in Saigon, SOG's analysts were indeed connecting the dots. By plotting the contacts and losses, the layout of the Ho Chi Minh Trail was revealed. It was a tremendous accomplishment, achieved at great cost, leading one senior NCO to liken SOG's tactics to driving a herd of goats across the minefield. That was, of course, a gross exaggeration, but it was not an exaggeration to say that SOG's reputation suffered greatly within the ranks of the clannish senior Special Forces community. I was assigned to a 7th Group A team at the time. My team sergeant, Roy Bradford, who had been a Marine in World War II, fought in Korea, and joined the 77th Special Forces Group in the 50s, pointed out a guy and whispered with awe and respect, "That guy was in SOG." A few months later, I had orders for Vietnam. Bradford sat me down. "Pay attention to me," he said. "When you get to Vietnam, stay out of SOG." "What do they do?" I asked. He shook his head, but I knew he knew exactly what they did. "They get people killed," he said. The number of experienced NCOs volunteering for SOG slowed to a trickle. By the end of 1967, with the map of the North Vietnamese supply lines in Laos drawn in the blood of SOG operators, analysts began to understand how it worked. Supplies were trucked south from the Magia Pass, while infantry units entered Laos through the Ben Raving Pass 20 miles north of the DMZ. Japong was the headquarters of the 559th Transportation Group, which controlled all logistics operations in Laos. Supplies flowed south to the Binh Tran 34 storage area, then east into I Corps and south to the Central Highlands. Base Area 611 was a multi-division staging area. Infantry units traveled south by foot west of the A Shau Valley to Base Area 607, which was the infiltration point for troops moving east to attack the coastal cities. The NVA kept Route 9 running west out of South Vietnam to Chapong, heavily guarded because it was considered the most likely avenue of American attack. With this knowledge, the mission for SOG's cross-border operators greatly expanded from the discovery of infiltration routes to monitoring them, a much more dangerous proposition for a unit that had already sustained heavy casualties. What the United States did not know in the last days of 1967 was that the North Vietnamese were delivering between 300 and 500 tons of supplies every day to the nearly 50,000 troops they had deployed in southern Laos in preparation for the siege of Khe Sanh and the coming Tet Offensive. In 1968, a couple of hundred MACV SOG operators would infiltrate this now well-defended logistical system. Only half would survive. This was my war. I'll talk about it next time. Thanks for watching. You will find my book Dawson's War worthwhile. Rather than just accounts of MACV SOG's various missions, Dawson's War is the story of 5 men. 3 Americans and 2 Broome Mountain Yard mercenaries. I'll take you with us for a year. You'll get your fair share of gunfights in Laos, because we did. But SOG was so much more than gunfights. SOG was a brotherhood, and unless you experience the camaraderie we shared, you can't really know SOG. Through Dawson's War, these 5 men will become your friends, and like we do, you'll miss them when it's over. In the end, you'll be able to answer SOG's most asked question: what kind of men ran these dangerous missions? Get a copy today at Amazon. Hey, do me a favor, like and subscribe. It helps. Thanks.